My name is Dmitry Ivanovich Petrov, and my story begins long before the Chernobyl disaster changed my life forever. I was born in a small village on the outskirts of Moscow, and like many of my generation, I was raised in the shadow of Soviet power. My father was a soldier and my mother a school teacher. I grew up listening to stories of heroism and duty to Mother Russia, which inevitably led me to enlist in the army. I served with pride for a decade, participating in various missions across the vast Soviet Union. My training and experience made me an efficient soldier, but I always felt like just another cog in the massive military machine. I never imagined that my fate would lead me to face horrors that would challenge not only my abilities as a soldier, but also my sanity. On April 26, 1986, the world changed. The explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant unleashed a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. As the news spread, I was called for a special mission to join the group of liquidators. Our task was clear and terrifyingly simple: to eliminate the radiation-contaminated wildlife now roaming the exclusion zone. The summons came with an urgency that made the gravity of the situation clear. Our team consisted of 3 members. I, Dmitry, was responsible for eliminating the contaminated animals. Andrei drove the armored vehicle that transported us through the dangerous and desolate region. The 3rd member, Nikolai, was in charge of measuring radiation levels, ensuring we never exceeded the safety limits for our equipment. On our first mission, we gathered at the base camp to receive instructions. The air was heavy with palpable tension, an underlying fear that none of us dared to express. Our leader, Sergeant Sergei, was a man of few words, but his gaze spoke more than 1,000 speeches. He explained the area we would cover that day, a section of forest a few kilometers from the plant. Remember, stay together and follow protocol. Do not underestimate what you will encounter out there, he warned before letting us depart. We entered the exclusion zone, and what I saw there is something I will never be able to forget. The landscape was desolate, as if life had been ripped out by the roots out. The trees were dead, their branches twisted like claws trying to tear the sky. The ground, covered in a layer of radioactive dust, emitted a sinister glow under the dying sun. We moved forward cautiously, aware that each step brought us closer to the unknown. Andrei kept the vehicle moving slowly, while Nikolai monitored the dosimeter, whose rhythmic beeps became an unsettling soundtrack to our mission. Finally, we reached a clearing and decided to continue on foot. We walked in formation, rifles in hand, scanning the environment for any signs of life. We soon encountered the first animals, creatures deformed by radiation, moving with a slowness that made their elimination almost merciful. However, as we advanced, something in the air changed. The atmosphere grew more oppressive, and a sense of being watched settled in my mind. I knew that day would only be the beginning of something much darker and more terrifying than I could ever imagine. The routine of our group soon turned into a monotonous cycle, though never less terrifying. Each day began with a meticulous review of our equipment: rifles, protective suits, dosimeters, and the armored vehicle. Andrei was thorough with the vehicle, ensuring it was always in perfect condition, while Nikolai and I checked the weapons and supplies. Our job was to enter the designated zones, locate and eliminate any contaminated animals that could pose a threat. The elimination was not just a matter of public health. Those animals carried dangerous levels of radiation, and leaving them free could exacerbate an already catastrophic situation. On one of our routine outings, we headed to a section of the forest we had not yet explored. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt earth and decay. Andrei stopped the vehicle near a clearing, and we cautiously disembarked, each taking up our designated position. The first encounter of the day was with a mutated boar. Its eyes glowed with an inhuman fury, and its skin was covered with oozing sores. I took it down with a precise shot, and its body fell heavily to the ground. There was no time to reflect. We continued advancing, eliminating several other creatures along the way. Deer with twisted limbs, foxes with multiple heads, and birds whose calls were distorted screams. Then we found it. At first glance, it looked like another deer, but something about its movement caught my attention. I approached slowly, aiming with my rifle. The creature stopped and turned its head towards me. It was smaller than the other animals, no more than 70 centimeters tall. It had a humanoid form, but its head was that of a deer, with huge teeth resembling those of a wolf. Its eyes, black and empty, seemed to stare directly into my soul. I fired without hesitation. The creature fell to the ground, and we approached to inspect it. Andrei and Nikolai were as disconcerted as I was. We examined it in silence, each lost in our own dark thoughts. "This isn't a normal mutation," Nikolai finally said, breaking the silence. "The radiation did something more here." "Are there more like this?" Andrei asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If this is a young one, then yes, and they might be much larger," I replied, my mind struggling to grasp the implications. The presence of that creature changed everything. We realized our mission was even more dangerous than we had anticipated. We decided to proceed with more caution, aware that we might be facing something more sinister than simple mutated animals. As we advanced, the sounds of the forest seemed to intensify. Every crackle, every whisper of the wind through the trees put us on high alert. Paranoia began to set in, and every shadow seemed to hide an invisible threat. That night, as we returned to camp, I couldn't stop thinking about the creature. Its image was etched in my mind, a mix of horror and fascination. I knew I wouldn't be able to forget what I had seen, and that it was only the beginning of a series of events that would test not only our skills as soldiers, but our very humanity. The nights in the exclusion zone were long and dark, the silence broken only by the rustling of the trees and the occasional moan of the wind. We slept little, each lost in disturbing thoughts about the creature we had encountered. We knew there were more of them, and that they were larger and more dangerous. We prepared for a deeper exploration, determined to better understand the threat we were facing. The next morning, after a brief and somber breakfast, we headed to a more remote section of the forest. Nikolai's dosimeter beeped constantly, its rhythm a constant reminder of the invisible danger surrounding us. Andrei drove the armored vehicle with almost military precision, taking us as close as possible to the target area before stopping. "This place seems denser than the other zones," Andrei commented as we made a final check of our equipment. "That's why we're here," I replied. "We need to know what else is lurking in these shadows." We advanced cautiously, following a trail of unusually large footprints. The marks were deep, with grooves suggesting sharp claws and considerable weight. The air was thick with the smell of death and decay, making us grimace behind our masks. "I don't like this," Nikolai murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the dosimeter. We continued following the trail until we reached a clearing where the ground was covered with bones and animal remains. In the center, there was a huge footprint, clearly distinct from the others. Andrei knelt to examine it more closely. "It must be at least 2 meters tall," Andrei said, his tone incredulous. "This isn't just a simple mutation," I said. "We're dealing with something much more dangerous." Before he could respond, a guttural growl echoed through the trees. We turned in unison, rifles in hand, scanning the dense vegetation for movement. The creature emerged from the shadows with surprising speed. It was a much larger and more terrifying version of the young one we had found earlier. Its body was a mix of twisted muscles and dark fur, with a head that combined the most terrifying features of a deer and a wolf. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent intelligence. "Fire!" I shouted, and the forest was filled with the roar of our rifles. The bullets hit its thick skin, but the creature seemed unfazed. With an ear-splitting roar, it lunged at us, its claws slicing through the air. Andrei managed to dodge a deadly blow, while Nikolai and I kept firing. "Fall back," I ordered, moving us into a defensive formation. The creature paused briefly, assessing us with an almost calculating look. Then, with an impressive leap, it disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed was even more unsettling than its roar. "Is it dead?" Andrei asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't think so," I replied. "It's just evaluating us. This isn't an animal. It's something much worse." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows over the desolate landscape. The decision to return to camp was unanimous. The creature had made it clear that we were intruders in its territory, and we needed a better plan before facing it again. "Let's pull back for today," I ordered, aware that the danger was increasing with every minute we spent in that cursed zone. "We'll regroup and come up with a strategy for tomorrow." We climbed into the armored vehicle, and Andrei started the engine. The familiar sound of the engine roaring gave us a false sense of security as we moved away from the clearing. As we advanced, the landscape became even more desolate. The dead trees stood like specters, and the air was heavy with an ominous silence. Nikolai watched the dosimeter, its needle oscillating erratically. "Something's not right," he murmured, his face pale in the dim light of the dosimeter. "The radiation is increasing." I looked around, trying to find an explanation. "We must be near a contaminated source. Let's keep moving and get out of this area." But our problems were just beginning. Suddenly, the vehicle stopped abruptly, throwing us forward, and we felt as if something had shaken it violently. Andrei cursed under his breath as he tried to restart the engine. "The vehicle's not responding," he said, pounding the dashboard in frustration. We got out to investigate and soon discovered the cause. The wheels of the armored vehicle were flat, and the body was covered in deep scratches. "What the hell did this?" Andrei asked, his voice full of incredulity. Before I could respond, Nikolai's dosimeter began to beep alarmingly. 500 sieverts, he exclaimed. "That's impossible. We were in a safe zone." Panic began to grip us as we tried to communicate with the camp. The radio emitted only static, the signal blocked by the intense radiation. "We can't stay here," I said, trying to remain calm. "We have to move on foot and get away from this area." Just as we were about to leave, a guttural growl echoed through the vegetation. We turned towards the sound and saw it. The adult creature, with its imposing and terrifying figure, emerged from the shadows. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent intelligence, and its mouth revealed those sharp teeth we had learned to fear. "Fire!" I shouted, and our weapons unleashed a hail of bullets. The creature roared, momentarily retreating, but it didn't flee. Instead, it advanced towards us with frightening speed, its claws kicking up dust and leaves. We ran, firing wildly as we tried to put distance between ourselves and the beast. The forest, which had once seemed inert, was now a maze of shadows and threats. The beep of the dosimeter continued to rise and fall, a death symphony that accompanied our desperate steps. The creature seemed to toy with us, appearing and disappearing among the trees, its growls reverberating in the growing darkness. We knew we couldn't face it under these conditions. Our only hope was to reach the camp and call for reinforcements. Night was closing in on us with a crushing darkness. The silence of the forest was deafening, broken only by our gasps and the intermittent beep of Nikolai's dosimeter. We knew the creature was nearby, stalking us in the twilight. Every shadow seemed to hide its grotesque figure, and every snap made us turn with our hearts in our throats saying. Suddenly, the silence was broken by an ear-splitting roar. The creature emerged from the vegetation, its eyes glowing with inhuman ferocity. In an instant, it lunged at us with terrifying speed. Nikolai, who was closest to the beast, didn't have time to react. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. The creature fell upon Nikolai, its claws tearing through his protective suit with terrifying ease. The sound of flesh being torn and Nikolai's screams echoed through the air. The beast lifted him like a rag doll, ripping his arm off with a single motion. Blood arced across the ground in a macabre spray. Andrei and I opened fire, but our bullets seemed useless against the creature's fury. Nikolai fell to the ground, his body convulsing as life left him. The beast tossed him aside, focusing its attention on us. Its eyes were pits of hatred and hunger. "Run!" I shouted to Andrei, and we started running, firing sporadically behind us. The forest became a maze of shadows and obstacles, our flashlights barely illuminating our path. We could hear the creature behind us, its heavy footsteps and guttural breathing. Every time I looked back, I saw those eyes glowing in the darkness, chasing us with monstrous determination. We stumbled and fell, our weapons nearly useless in our trembling hands. The creature was closing in more and more, its growl growing louder. I could feel its breath on my neck, the promise of a violent and imminent death. Finally, we reached a small clearing and stopped, breathless, trying to gather our strength. Andrei was pale, his face a mask of terror. We knew we couldn't keep running forever. The creature would catch up to us sooner or later. "We have to face it here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Andrei nodded, though his eyes reflected despair. The clearing filled with the sound of our gunfire as the creature emerged from the darkness once more. It was a vision from a nightmare, its dark fur and blood-stained claws, its mouth open in a silent roar. It lunged at us, and time seemed to slow down. I managed to dodge its first claws, but Andrei wasn't so lucky. The creature grabbed him and with a brutal motion slammed him against a tree. I could hear the snap of his bones breaking. Andrei fell to the ground motionless, while the creature turned its attention to me. Panic gripped me, but adrenaline kept me standing. I kept firing, emptying my magazine into the beast. Finally, in a stroke of luck, one of my bullets hit its eye, causing it to recoil with a howl of pain. I took the opportunity to run. My mind was clouded by terror and the pain of loss. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away from that monstrosity. I ran until my legs could no longer carry me and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath with my heart racing. I ran through the forest, my steps echoing in the cold night. Adrenaline kept my legs moving, but every muscle in my body was on the verge of collapse. Nikolai's dosimeter, which I still carried with me, emitted erratic beeps, the radiation spikes oscillating alarmingly. Every shadow seemed to harbor the creature. Every sound of the forest made me turn with the rifle in hand. Fear dominated my mind, clouding my thoughts. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running before my body gave in to exhaustion. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I reached a clearing illuminated by the moon. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, my chest rising and falling frantically. The silence was total, but I knew the creature was nearby. I could feel its presence, a constant and inescapable threat. A snap behind me broke the silence, and I quickly turned, pointing my rifle into the darkness. The creature emerged from between the trees, its eyes glowing with renewed ferocity. There was no time to think. I started firing, each bullet a desperate effort to stop the beast. Bullets hit its thick skin but didn't seem to slow its advance. The creature growled and charged towards me with terrifying speed. Dodging was almost impossible. Its claws sliced through the air, forcing me to retreat, firing frantically as I tried to maintain distance. "Damn you, die!" I screamed, emptying my magazine at it. The creature paused briefly, its body trembling with each impact, but it didn't fall. Instead, it roared with indescribable fury and lunged at me again. Its claws hit me, and pain exploded through my body as its sharp nails tore through my protective suit. I fell to the ground, my rifle slipping from my trembling hands. The creature loomed over me, its fetid breath filling my lungs as I struggled to breathe. With one last ounce of energy, I pulled out my knife and plunged it into its side. The beast howled in pain and backed away, giving me a brief moment of respite. I staggered to my feet, desperation and fear overwhelming my mind. I had no more ammunition, and the knife wouldn't be enough to stop it. The creature watched me, its eyes filled with hatred and hunger. I knew I was in its territory, and it wouldn't let me leave alive. Desperation clouded my judgment, and I started running again. Though my strength was at its limit, I felt the throbbing pain in my side and the blood soaking my clothes. My thoughts were a whirlwind of panic and despair. There was no escape, and the certainty of my imminent death settled in my mind. I ran until my legs could carry me no more. I collapsed to the ground, unable to move. The creature approached slowly, savoring its triumph. Fear paralyzed me, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, no," I murmured, though I knew there was no place for mercy. The creature stopped a few meters from me, its eyes glowing with cruel malice. I knew this was the end. I had no strength left to fight nor to flee. All I could do was wait, helpless, as the beast prepared to deliver the final blow. Darkness enveloped me as I lay on the ground, my body trembling with pain and exhaustion. The creature approached slowly, its eyes glowing with insatiable malice. I could feel death lurking, ready to claim me. Then, on the edge of my consciousness, I heard an unexpected sound. Gunfire, distant but unmistakable. The creature stopped, turning its head towards the sound. Its ears twitched, alert, and for a brief moment, its attention was diverted from me. The gunfire grew louder, closer, and with it, the roar of engines. My comrades had sent reinforcements. From among the trees, armored vehicles emerged, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The air filled with the thunder of machine guns, and the tracer bullets lit up the night. The creature roared in fury and pain as the projectiles pierced its thick hide. It charged at the vehicles, but the heavy artillery kept it at bay. I watched as my comrades jumped out of the armored vehicles, their dark silhouettes moving with military precision. Lieutenant Alexei led the group, his face a mask of determination. Despite the creature's fury, it was being overwhelmed by the concentrated firepower. Its roars turned to whimpers of agony as the reinforcements continued to fire relentlessly. Finally, with one last desperate howl, the creature collapsed to the ground. Its body shuddered once, then lay still. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the echo of gunfire and the rumble of the engines. Alexei approached me, his face hardened by the battle. "Dmitri," he shouted, kneeling beside me. "Can you hear me?" I nodded weakly, my strength completely drained. Alexei called for the medics, who quickly lifted me and placed me in one of the vehicles. The pain and exhaustion were overwhelming, and my eyes closed as they put me on a stretcher. "We got it, Dmitri. Hang in there, you're going to be okay," Alexei said, his voice firm but tinged with concern. The ride back to camp was a blur of lights and sounds. I could hear the medics talking in low voices, their words blending with the noise of the engine. I was in shock, unable to fully process what had just happened. When we arrived at the camp, I was taken immediately to the infirmary tent. The medical staff worked quickly, assessing my wounds and administering painkillers. It felt as if my body was floating, reality dissolving into a sea of confused sensations. Alexei remained by my side, his presence an anchor amidst the chaos. "Rest, Dmitri. You're safe now," he murmured, holding my hand firmly. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness envelop me once more. I knew the creature was dead, but the images of its grotesque face and hate-filled eyes continued to haunt me. We had won a battle, but what lay ahead was uncertain. The weight of what we had faced hung over me, a constant reminder that the true horror still lurked in the shadows of the exclusion zone. The infirmary was a grim place, filled with the scent of antiseptic and despair. I was placed on an improvised bed, and as the medics frantically worked to treat my wounds, the reality of the situation began to settle in me. Each sharp sting of pain reminded me of how close I had come to death, and the creature continued to haunt my thoughts. "He's stable," one of the medics said, stepping back after injecting me with a sedative. "But he'll need time to recover." Lieutenant Alexei entered the tent, his expression serious. He approached my bed and sat in a nearby chair. "Dmitri, we need to talk," he said, his tone softer than usual. I nodded slightly, fighting against the exhaustion and pain. Alexei leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "What you saw out there, what you faced, cannot leave this camp. These things, if people find out, the panic would be unimaginable. The Soviet Union is in a delicate position. We need stability, not chaos." "Lieutenant, but," I began, my voice trembling. "Those creatures, how can we just ignore this? What if there are more?" Alexei sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "We're not ignoring it, Dmitri. We're handling it, but in a controlled way. We have specialized teams who will investigate and contain the situation. But this must remain a secret. If it gets out, the consequences would be devastating." "What kind of consequences?" I asked, trying to grasp the gravity of his words. "Chaos, panic, the collapse of public order," Alexei explained. "People are already scared of the radiation and the disaster. If we add mutant monsters into the mix, we'll lose control. Plus, other countries could exploit our weakness. We can't allow that." Alexei's words were harsh, but there was a cold logic to them. I knew he was right, but accepting to keep this secret went against everything I had learned about truth and duty. "So what do we do?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You move on, Dmitri," Alexei said firmly. "Recover, return to your life, and take this secret with you to the grave. It's the price we have to pay to protect our people." I remained silent, processing his words. The idea of hiding the truth was like poison in my mind, but I saw no other option after everything we had experienced. "I understand," I finally said, though the certainty in my words was fragile. "I'll keep the secret." Alexei nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I know it's a lot to ask, Dmitri, but I trust you. You're one of the best, and I know you'll do what's right." I lay there, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The sedative began to take effect, and my mind fogged as I slipped into a restless sleep. The images of the creature and the deaths of my comrades continued to haunt me, a constant reminder of the horrors we faced. The secret I was to keep was a heavy burden, but I had no other choice. I knew my life would never be the same. I had seen the face of true horror, and now I had to live with that knowledge in silence. That night, as darkness enveloped the camp, a sense of unease hung in the air. Even knowing the creature was dead, the fear remained, a distant echo from the shadowy depths of the exclusion zone. I knew the creatures were not mere mutations, and that Chernobyl's radiation had unleashed something far older and more sinister. As I rested in the infirmary, listening to the distant sound of the guards' footsteps and the rustling of the trees in the wind, I realized that this was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the veil of secrecy, the real nightmare was just beginning, and those who dared to challenge the shadows of Chernobyl would face horrors beyond comprehension. Sleep brought me brief relief, but even in my dreams, the shadows stretched long, and the creature, with its glowing eyes and insatiable hunger, waited patiently, knowing that the true terror could not be contained by mere human secrecy.